The Freeway Phantom murders was a series of murders that took place from the spring of 1971 to the fall of 1972 in the D.C. area. 6 African American girls were kidnapped, raped, and murdered, leaving 6 families heartbroken as 50 years have gone by, and the tragic murders of the Freeway Phantom haven't been solved since. The Freeway Phantom murders have been mishandled, abandoned, and unfortunately unsolved. This case still sends chills down the backs of everyone's necks who remember it as if it were yesterday. Let's go back to the spring of 1971. 13-year-old Carol Spinks was a 7th grader at Johnson Junior High School and was one of 8 children and had an identical twin sister named Carolyn. The twins were described as inseparable, while Carolyn was more outspoken, Carol was more so quiet. On April 25, 1971, a hot Sunday for the springtime in Washington, D.C.'s Congress Heights, the mother of Carol Spinks, Alantine, left that day to visit a relative. Before she left, Alantine gave her children strict instructions not to leave the house or open the door for anyone. A while after Alantine left, a knock was at the door. It was Valerie, Carol's older sister, who was visiting a friend across the hall. Valerie asked one of the kids to go to the local 7-Eleven and pick up a few groceries for her. The kids all said no, but Valerie continued to knock on the door. Eventually, Carol got fed up and said she'll go. The 7-Eleven was in Prince George County across the state border in Maryland. This one decision would cause Carol Spinks to lose her life. Along the way to the store, Carol ran into somebody unexpected. Her mother. Scolding her for leaving the house, Alantine told her she could continue running her errands, but she will be punished when she got home. Carol would never make it back home to receive her punishment. A few hours pass by, and Alantine arrives back home asking where Carol is. The other kids inform her she hasn't made it back home yet, so Alantine gets worried. She calls the police, and the police tells her that Carol must have run away. Alantine went out searching for her daughter with no luck. Carol was just gone. 6 days later, police officials arrived at Carol Spinks' home. The Spinks children heard the screams of their mother as they broke the news of Carol's death. Earlier that day, a group of kids were playing in a grassy area near St. Elizabeth's Hospital. That's when an 11-year-old boy spotted the body of Carol Spinks by I-295. Carol was fully clothed, but the only thing missing was her shoes. Carol had been sodomized, raped, strangled, and had been dead for 2-3 days. She also had cuts on her hands, face, neck, and chest. Autopsy also shows that her killer fed her as citrus fruit was found in her stomach. As far as it's known, Carol went into the 7-Eleven and bought TV dinners, a loaf of bread, and a soda. An eyewitness told authorities that they had seen Carol walking back home with her groceries. It's safe to say that Carol Spinks disappeared within that half-mile distance. Carol's sister said the police were hardly around when her sister was murdered and that she feared that if it could happen to her sister, then it will happen again, and it did. 2 months have passed since Carol's body was found, and the killer was on the move again. Darlenia Johnson, a 16-year-old girl who lived in the same neighborhood as Carol Spinks, left her home on July 9, 1971. Darlenia was headed to her job where she was a counselor at the Oxen Run Recreation Center. Like most teenagers, she was excited for the summer and was looking forward to spending time with her friends and boyfriend. Darlenia's mother wasn't expecting her to return home until the following day because the center was having a sleepover for the kids that night. Although her job was within walking distance from her house, Darlenia never showed up for work. The next day, the 16-year-old was filed as a missing person. A witness came forward and stated they saw Darlenia that afternoon with her boyfriend. Police tried to investigate the sighting further, but her boyfriend's mother would not allow him to talk to authorities. Another witness would tell police they saw Darlenia driving around with an older African-American man in an old black car. After Darlenia's abduction, her mother would receive phone calls from a mysterious person. During most of these calls, the caller would be silent, but she could hear them breathing on the other end. However, In the last call, she received the person on the other end said, "I killed your daughter." It was evident that after Darlenia's disappearance, police officials at the time did not seem to put their best foot forward in her case. Almost 2 weeks after her disappearance, a driver pulled over on Interstate 295 due to car troubles. There he saw the body of Darlenia Johnson. He called the police to report what he had found, but this call was the second call police had received about a young woman's body. The police made it out that way but never got out of the car. Only passing by sight, they reduced the call as a false sighting. On Monday, July 19, 1971, one of the callers had returned to I-295 to see if authorities had taken the body. They were shocked to discover that the body was still in the same spot as it had been for a week after reporting it to the police. The caller got a hold of their boss, who got a hold of Charles Bodden, a police officer in Washington, D.C. Bodden was off duty but made his way to the scene and got police officials involved. That's when the body was discovered to belong to Darlenia Johnson. Due to Darlenia's body being exposed to the high temperatures of the summer heat, she was not only unrecognizable, but most of the evidence on her body was gone. Although authorities couldn't get much evidence for sexual assault, they could determine she was strangled. Darlenia's body was just 15 feet away from where the body of Carol Spinks was found. 8 days later, it happened again. Brenda Crockett was the third victim. Brenda Crockett was 10 years old who lived on the Northwest with her mother, younger sister, and her mother's boyfriend. Brenda was described as a beautiful young girl who loved attending church. On July 27, 1971, Brenda's mother gave her daughter money to go to the local Safeway store to pick up a loaf of bread and dog food. Brenda left home barefoot with curlers in her hair. Before she left, Brenda's mother advised her to take a friend with her. Instead of taking her mother's advice, Brenda headed out 5 blocks to the store alone. An hour went by, and Brenda's mother became worried and went searching for her 10-year-old. A few hours later, the phone rang in the Crockett's household. While everyone else searched for her older sister, 7-year-old Bertha was home with her mother's boyfriend and answered the phone when it rang. Brenda was on the other end crying. Brenda told her sister that a white man had taken her, and she was headed home in a cab. A key thing Brenda said to her sister before the phone call ended was that she was in Virginia. A while later, after the first call, Brenda called home again. This time her mother's boyfriend answered the phone. He tried his best to get more information out of Brenda than Bertha could, but she ended up telling him the same thing: a white man had picked her up, but it was something strange that Brenda asked him before hanging up. She asked, "Did my mother see me?" This had struck him as odd because if she was in Virginia, how could her mother see her? It is possible that the killer had Brenda call home to make sure her mother had not spotted him. It is also possible that Brenda's mother had spoken with her daughter's abductor while searching for her daughter around the neighborhood. Brenda's mother's boyfriend had heard footsteps in the background, and then the last words Brenda said over the phone before she hung up was, "I'll see you." On the morning of July 28, 1971, a hitchhiker found the body of what appeared to be a little girl laying along US Route 50. Brenda had been strangled with a scarf that was still wrapped around her neck. Something that police noticed was Brenda's body looked clean, like her kidnapper had washed her feet. Mind you, Brenda had walked to the store barefoot. It is highly suspected that the kidnapper was someone who knew the Crockett family. It was also possible that the phone calls were scripted to throw off investigators. A little over 2 months after Brenda Crockett's body discovery, the killer moved on to his 4th victim. Nia Nemoshia Yates, better known as Nino, was a 12-year-old girl living with her father and stepmother in the Northeast. Nemoshia's stepmother had recently given birth, so her father had sent her out to a Safeway grocery store, just like Brenda Crockett's mother had sent her. Nino left around 7 p.m. and picked up paper plates, sugar, and flour. An employee had said they saw these same items laying outside of the store. It is safe to conclude that Nemoshia was abducted in the Safeway parking lot. A few hours later, the 6th grader's body was found. Like the previous victims, Nia Nemoshia was raped, strangled, and her shoes were missing. Nino was strangled so badly that reports show that her killer broke her esophagus. A witness reported seeing Nino getting into a blue Volkswagen. After Nanomosha Yates' death, people in and around the DC area started to put pressure on the police to solve these murders. That's when police officials began connecting all four deaths, thus calling the serial killer the Freeway Phantom. With the media now giving the serial killer a name, the families and the rest of the DC citizens were hoping the police would solve this case. 6 weeks after Nanomosha Yates' death, 18-year-old Brenda Woodard had dinner with a classmate at Ben's Chili Bowl in Washington, D.C. Woodard lived with her family in Baltimore, Maryland, and took night classes at Cardozo High School. Brenda and her friend both took the first bus back home from Ben's Chili Bowl, but Brenda had to transfer to another bus, so she said her goodbyes and made it onto the second bus. After that, no one knows exactly what happened. Brenda wouldn't be seen again until her body was discovered the following day. On November 16, 1971, a police officer drove near Prince George County on Route 202 and discovered Brenda Woodard's body. She had been raped, strangled, and unlike the other victims, stabbed multiple times. The black turtleneck that Brenda was wearing was on inside out, the buttons on her top and skirt were missing, and unlike the other victims, her boots were still on her feet. Police also concluded that Brenda fought back against her attacker as she had defense wounds on her hands. In Brenda's pocket was a note that read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." The FBI concluded that Brenda was the one who wrote the note because it matched similar handwriting patterns of hers. Detective Romaine Jenkins believed that Woodard knew her killer as her handwriting was punctuated correctly. Further examinations of her clothing found 2 separate hair samples. 10 months had passed since the killer had last struck, and most people thought he had stopped after the killing of Brenda Woodard. This would be proven wrong when the 6th and final victim linked to the Freeway Phantom murders was killed. On September 5, 1972, Diane Williams, a 17-year-old who had just started her senior year at Ballou High School in Washington, D.C., was the last known victim of the Freeway Phantom. On the night of her disappearance, Diane wanted to visit her boyfriend. Her parents told her she could go, but she had to be home by 10 o'clock. After the couple spent the evening together, Diane's boyfriend walked her to her bus stop, kissing her goodbye. Diane headed on the bus back home to Halley Terrace, located in the southeast, but unfortunately, Diane would never make it back home. Her body would be found the next morning. She had been strangled and left along I-295, which was near her house. Like the previous victims, Diane's shoes were removed from her feet. Some of Diane's neighbors told police they heard screams that night, possibly coming from the 17-year-old. Unlike the other victims, no sexual assault was found, but semen was found on her clothes, which police thought came from her boyfriend. When asked about the semen, Diane's boyfriend told them that the semen was not his because he and Diane did not get involved with anything sexual that night. Even after finding this out, the semen sample has remained untested to this day. When it comes to victims, most serial killers always have a type, meaning the common characteristics or traits that the victims share. One thing all 6 girls had in common was how petite they were, but most of the girls also shared something else similar. Carol Spinks, Darlenia Johnson, Brenda Woodard, and Diane Williams all shared the same middle name, Denise. It was also reported that the police found green fibers on 5 of the girls when the bodies were found. After the death of Nanomosha, when investigators started to connect the first 4 murders, police had found African American hairs in 3 of the girls' underwear, pointing to the killer being an African American man. Although there are many similarities between the 6 deaths, Brenda Woodard's death does seem to have some slight differences. Unlike the other victims whose shoes were removed from their feet, Brenda Woodard still had her boots on when her body was discovered. The killer also made her write a note saying he did this but didn't leave a note after killing Diane Williams 10 months later. Woodard was also stabbed multiple times, unlike the other victims who were just strangled. It's possible that the reason why Brenda was stabbed was due to her fighting back against her attacker. Some people believe that Brenda Woodard's death was caused by a copycat killer who wanted to make it look like the Freeway Phantom did it. This is a possibility, but unfortunately, we would never really know for sure. Although the murders were not properly investigated at first, the police did have their suspects. Robert Eskins was a middle-aged man who worked as a computer technician at St. Elizabeth's Hospital and was also a former patient there as well. Now St. Elizabeth's is the same hospital where Carol Spink's body was near. Eskins also constantly used the term tantamount, which was an unusual word that was written on the note found in Brenda Woodard's pocket. It turns out that Eskins had a terrible past with females in his life. Back in 1938, Eskins murdered a prostitute by poisoning her. Eskins was released from prison due to a legal technicality in 1958. In 1977, Eskins kidnapped, beat, and raped a young woman, so the police thought that they might have their guy. When police looked into Robert Eskins' past, Detective Lloyd Davis started to make connections to Eskins and the Freeway Phantom. Police had found photos of young women, soiled scarves, and a knife in his home. They then found 2 buttons and a gold earring under his back seat, but due to the fibers that were found on the victims not matching Eskins' car, police ruled him out as a suspect. Another lead that investigators looked into was the Green Vegas. The Green Vegas were a gang who drove a green Chevrolet and raped women in the earlier 1970s along the DC area. An anonymous tip came in that the Green Vegas were responsible for the Freeway Phantom murders. One inmate who was an associate of the gang started to feed police information about the Freeway Phantom deaths being committed by the Green Vegas. This inmate took police investigators to the scene of the crimes of Darlenia Johnson and Brenda Woodard and explained how the girls were killed. The information he gave was inconsistent as he would constantly mix up the victims. While driving with police, this inmate heard on the radio that Prince George County's state attorney, Arthur A. Marshall, leaked the information of his confession to the press. The inmate then stopped talking to the police and the trail once again went cold. The FBI had retrieved letters between the Green Vegas gang members and the inmate. The inmate admitted to lying to police just to get his prison sentence reduced by feeding them information about the case. This case is unfortunate and caused devastation to a lot of families. One of Carol Spink's sisters said that she would go to the police station consistently and ask them what are they doing to solve her sister's murder, and the police would brush her off. In 1987, Detective Romaine Jenkins was promoted to sergeant and was very passionate about solving this case. But strangely enough, when Sergeant Jenkins began looking back into the evidence that was collected, she found out that it was all destroyed. All of the evidence that police had gotten from these girls were just gone. After finding out the evidence was destroyed, Sergeant Jenkins makes a call to the FBI. With their help, she reconstructs the case files, as well as a behavioral analysis. According to the analysis, the killer was a loner between the ages of 27 to 32 who most likely had a job during the day. Investigators also believe that he knew some of these girls and was able to gain their trust. Unfortunately, Sergeant Jenkins retired in 1994, and the case was never solved. It's 50 years since these murders started, and this case remains cold with no new leads. The hurt and constant pain these 6 families have suffered over the years continues to linger over them. 6 black girls were raped and brutally murdered, and to this day, their families don't know who did it, and they don't have justice.